happy to be here. I'm actually stunned this many people came out. It must be the wine and cheese they put out. It's certainly not my topic. I did not come tonight to give a scholarly lecture that would strain most of us. This is to be a nice discussion about how we got to where we are as Masons, as a Masonic society. And how many people in the room are not Masons? All right, so there's a good number. And there's something I've run across is that we hear all kinds of things about Masonry, and it's kind of left hanging in the air as to whether you believe it or not. And I have a long history in studying this. As you heard tonight, it started in 1982, and I had the very good fortune. I was working in Homicide, New York City, and the fellow who had the office across from me was a doctor in comparative religions. He was also an anthropologist. And they would call him out on anything that had any kind of ritualistic or symbolism attached to it. And most of it was nonsense, but he needed somebody to drive him. I would take him out, and he would say, "Oh, this is nothing. This is a Masonic symbol. This guy was a Mason. Oh, this guy was a Rosicrucian. This guy." But it started it piqued my curiosity and interest as what do these symbols mean and why are they so important to people, and at the same time, why are they instantly recognizable to people around the world? So our society, to a large extent, is guided by the symbols that we have. And not to put too fine a point on it, but you can put a crucifix or a cross up anywhere in the world, and even if you're not a Christian, everybody knows what that is. If you put the American flag up someplace, everybody knows what that is. And a lot of people know what that square and compass means. I get a lot of comments on a ring or a hat sometimes, and occasionally people ask me, what is that? But that's very rare. So as we go through this tonight, I want you to understand that there's so much involved in Masonry. We're looking at almost maybe a 4,000 or 5,000 year history from where all these ideas began to where we are today. So obviously we can't do all that this evening, okay? Well, we're only going to go to about 2 o'clock this morning. You should be fine, okay? I'll even skip the test for you guys. It's going to be okay. But as we go through this, we realize that symbols have been part of mankind forever. There's always been the chief who wore the certain hat, or the shaman who got the pretty colored shells and put them on a bead, and he was the guy everybody looked to for. That was the symbol of his office. And we've had this type of thing as long as man has been walking upright. So to understand the rest of the lecture tonight, we just have to establish a few ground rules. And here's the most basic. I like talking to people, not at them, okay? Okay, here's my first rule. This means yes, this means no, this means I don't care, and this means go away, okay? I don't care which one you do, just let me know you're alive. It's very disturbing to look at a room full of wooden Indians. It makes me feel bad. Anyway, to understand the rest of what we're going to talk about tonight, we can't look at Masonry strictly in any one sense. And what I mean by that, there's a duality here. There's the Masonry that is historic. You can go back in the records, and you can, if you really like history stuff, you can go to 1717 and work your way forward, and you can see all the different lodges and when they were formed and who was made a Mason and who was the king of this, that, and the other. And you can have a grand old time, and you can follow that forever. You can really go down a rabbit hole with that because there's a lot there to see. There's a lot to understand. And all of that is factually true. You can see records of these things. And you have various poems and charges that are given, and they might vary, and they might have some details that are not the same, but there's a general direction to them. So you can really get into the history of it that way. The other side of this is the mythology, the story of Masonry. And it's not necessarily factually true, but it gives us a truth. Does that make sense? And that's really what we're going to look at is what's the message being given to us? Where did that message come from? Well, that would be the wisdom part of the story. What are they trying to tell us in the general sense? The strength part of the lecture will be about how is this thing formed to carry that message? What is our body? What is the formation and the societal construct of Masonry, and why has it lasted 300 years? And the last part of the story is beauty, and I like this part of the story the best. because, you know, we live in a society and everybody has their own views on politics. We don't get into any of that. But the point is, we hear words today like inclusiveness and, you know, togetherness. And, well, if you look at Masonry, Masonry was the first group of men who sat together and said, listen, we don't care what you are. Do you believe in a God? I believe in a creator God. Good. You can sit next to me. And we can be together and we can have a intercourse with each other and not matter where we come from or what it is. As long as I know you're a man who's living your life by a set of sacred law, I can sit next to you in a lodge. And that was a stunning thing for the time it came out with, when it was first brought about. So the end of the lecture is about the beauty. And the beauty is not just that little part, but what is the result of men coming together like this? Well, we have a lot of dinners, right? We eat a lot of stuff, and it's really pretty good, right, Byron? We do all right. We eat okay. And I was as thin as this guy. Where was he? My Afro buddy. I was as thin as you when I joined this thing. Look at me now, okay? So they feed me good here, okay? But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because of the ideals they expressed. And at the end of the lecture, we're going to talk about what does Masonry do, not just for Masons, but for other people. Okay? Fair? Do we have to review the rules? No? Okay. All right. You're going to have to bear with me because my last good working body part is going. I can't see anymore. So I have my little clicker. Right will take me forward, they tell me. Okay, wisdom. We just talked about that. To understand wisdom, you'd have to understand about 50 different ancient languages and get what their scripture tells you about this, that, and the other. But symbols are our shortcut. Symbols will tell us exactly what somebody is talking about, thinking, or trying to tell you. So in ancient times, even through today, we had the circle and the square. And we have these going back into the kingdom of Kemet, which is before the first dynasty in Egypt. That's quite a ways back. That's a really long time ago. And those symbols have always been, well, wrong way. They've always been laden with meaning. So when people saw them, it wasn't, oh, a nice circle. There was an entire message involved. So the circle always was about infinity. It was about spirituality. It was about just the life of your soul, the life of your eternal being. To add a little more meaning to it, we have the snake consuming the snake, the Ouroboros, and what it's telling, the message there is that life consumes life in order to continue. So if you saw this any place, you knew they were talking about the spiritual life of man. The square traditionally was talking about earthly things. The four corners of the world, the four seasons, the four directions, the four elements. This is our physical being. This is our physical world. So it didn't take a lot for people who didn't read or write to understand this. They got to hear this once, and no matter where they saw it, they understood it. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not going into a lot of different symbols. I'm trying to get across the idea that this is how we communicated early on. Not everybody had the benefit of reading and writing. Here we have one of the great mysteries of all time, how to put the circle in the square or the square in the circle, whichever way you want to say it. The question really is, can you make a spiritual life that's perfect and a physical world that's perfect? Can you do both things? There was a mathematical equation. These two fellas in 1882 decided you couldn't do it in a finite number of attempts, but that's not the question. The question is, can you as a man form your life into such a way that you have a great spiritual life and a great physical life? That's the eternal question that we end up with our square and compass on the ring. And that's what I'll come to in a second. Okay. That's a little primer of how we got our ideas, how symbols were used. In ancient times, we had what's called the mystery schools. And this is where I lean heavily here on the likes of some of the old writers. My mind just went completely blank. But the idea here is that the mystery schools are the genesis of our thought about life. It was the first attempt man-made on an organized basis, not only to have knowledge, but they're transmitted to other people. Manley P. Hall was the name I was thinking of. Manley P. Hall writes a lot about this, as does Pike and several of the others. But the point of this is that when we look at these things, when we look that far back, these people had messages that were sometimes consistent, but they were always kept closely guarded. They were held very tightly. Information was power, as it is today. And these men looked up in the skies, and they had their astrotheology, and they were able to set times and dates, years and seasons and cycles by the movements of the sun and the stars. And they were able to look at these things and tell you when the planting season was, and what was a good time for war, and what was a good time to build a building, and how you should lay the building out according to the stars. And this seems a little silly to us today, but there was a logic to what they were doing. They were saying in their own way that there is an order to the world. There's an order to the universe. And if you rightly understand that universe, you can then come in conjunction and have a good spiritual life and a good earthly life, a good earthly being. So we're going to talk about some of the messages, and these are obviously not Masonic messages. These are the people who, or the gods and goddesses whose deities gave us ideas. And interesting, I have a handwritten note here. A fellow named Origen, he was a Christian priest back in Alexandria, about 200 years after the death of Christ. And he writes about these mystery schools. And it's interesting what he says. The primary duty of the schools is to protect the ancient system of enlightenment, healing, manifestation, and transformation. And here's the key part. He says, the Egyptian philosophers have sublime notions with regard to the divine nature, which they have kept secret for millennium and have never discovered to the people, but under the veil of fables and allegories. Well, that sounds a lot like Masonry, because Masonry is a beautiful system of morality veiled in allegory, illustrated with symbols. So this is an idea that's very old. Don't just come right out and say what you're saying, because it's not for everybody, is the message here. It's for the people who want to discover it and the people who are actually looking for it. So obviously everybody came tonight for something, right? It wasn't to see this handsome guy. You came to hear something. You came to find something out, which is the reason anybody who became a Mason came, yes? Amazing. I have no friends at all. And the one time I don't turn this thing off, it rings on me. In any event, that should be the end of him. In any event, as these mystery schools developed, they had systems of transmitting knowledge, they had their ceremonies, they had their gods and goddesses, but the theme for most of them was pretty consistent. Here we have Ganesha, and I'm not going into the whole story, but basically he was there to guard the boudoir of the goddess. And apparently he didn't do a good job, and somebody was angry with him, and off with his head. His head comes right off, and the goddess takes mercy on him, and she brings him back. She rejuvenates his life. He has life eternal now. I don't know whether it was a punishment or not, but she felt the other guy was a little bit jealous of him, so she gave him an elephant's head to maybe make him look a little less handsome. I don't know what the deal with that is. I'm not a theologian. But the point of the story is they brought him back. Tammuz, all for generations and generations, was seen as a vegetation god. Life, death, regeneration was repeated over and over again. Now, the idea of him being a regeneration god was done away with back in the 20th century, but it doesn't affect us tonight, because the thinking on Masonry and the thinking on esoteric schools wasn't changed by this discovery. It was formed by these types of stories. Things live, they die, they resurrect. There is a continuity in these stories. Here we have Persephone and Demeter, and once again, death is defeated. Down to the underworld, spend some time there, come back up. She's been resurrected. Here's my guy, Dionysus, the god of wine. That's why you all really came tonight, right? Was the wine. I know it's not me. There's a number of myths about him, but one of them involves death and resurrection again. Osiris. There are several stories about him, but again, what's the theme? The theme is he died, he was resurrected, he lives eternally. So the mystery schools had this theme to them. Not all of them, but there was enough of them to get this theme going, okay? You have all these different mystery schools here, and as we went along, we had the Greek philosophers carrying on. They needed to make sense of this. They needed to find some way to make sense of their world. And one of the things they did, we had gentlemen who would look at this, and they would tell us, well, this is what I think. And we have great philosophical, oh my God, great philosophical schools based on this. And Pythagoras comes to mind. And what did he tell us? Everything in the world is made in number, weight, and measure. They can look at the arithmetic of something and understand its nature by that. Pythagoras gave us the idea of the spheres of the heavens singing to us. Interesting, the last 50 years or so, we actually found out some of these planets actually make some kind of humming or singing noise. So these ideas were there. We have the idea from him that these things, if understood correctly, will help us understand our life, it'll help us understand our spirituality. It gets passed on through the years, and we're not going to go through all the philosophers because we'd all go right to sleep, but we'll move up to Aristotle, and he gave us the idea that everything in the universe is correct. It's exactly right the way it is. Nothing is wrong because this is the way it's made, and everything is in the station. This was reinforced by St. Augustine centuries later, with the slight change that it's all right and correct because God, the Christian God, made it that way. But the theme was the same. And with this in mind, these people put forth a philosophy that really formed much of our Western civilization. And we've all heard of things like the divine right of kings. Well, it comes directly from that. It comes from this thinking. Now, this is not Masonic thinking. I'm trying to give you an idea of the way the mystery schools operated, the way they put things together for themselves. So as this went on, oh my goodness, we get something called a collegium. And the original ones, we have records 400 BC, and they were running around in Greece. Okay, and there was all kinds of collegium. I'm not going to spend too much time on the collegium in Greece, just know that they were there, and know that they caused some political problems in 413, because it comes up again later with the Romans. The collegium were groups of people who gathered together for a certain cause, a certain occupation, or a certain god and goddess, and they would have their meetings and they would have their ceremonies, and some of them got into politics. Well, apparently they worked so well that the politicians got upset. So what do you think happens when the politicians get upset with the real people's movement? What happens to it? It's gone, right? So alternately, it was in, it was out, it was in and out, depending on when you look in their history. This leads us into the strength part of our story. It involves the collegium. We hear often in our readings and when you listen to lecturers, or you might listen to tapes or whatever, and you hear say, well, Masonry has connections to the Roman Collegium. And they kind of let it hang there. They let it drop. Well, how'd that connection come about? Is it even true? Is there any reality to it? And here's an interesting thing. Is it factually correct? I don't know. Is it probable? Yeah, it's real probable. I'm going to lay out a case tonight for why it's probable. Rome is founded. And we're not going to do a history lesson on Rome, but to say, when Rome was first founded, it was founded by a warrior fellow, and Romulus and Remus, the old story of the wolf and the children, the 7 hills of Rome. We all know this from our grammar school or high school. But the point of Rome at that time that I'm trying to get to is that it was almost a totally manned society. It was men. These were warriors. And they engaged in trade, they engaged in battle, and they engaged in farming. And they would, after a while, guess what they start to miss? Come on, anybody? Nobody? They were missing women. They want, they're a bunch of men living out along the side of the river, doing trade and all kinds of things. They had no women. So it leads to an interesting story called the rape of the Sabian women. And it relates directly to the Collegium because Rome was founded with such discord, and later on it was brought together by a collegium-type society. What happened? I describe what Rome was like, and then Rome decides, we're going to throw a big party. And the king of Rome, whose name is right out of my mind at the moment, makes the claim that he found in a cave some artifacts related to the god Poseidon. And in honor of this, he's going to throw a major feast, and he invites all the surrounding tribes. And one of the tribes that showed up was the Sabians. And they were close by, and they showed up with their women and children. Well, the party's not even really started, and the king of Rome at the time says, well, I put my cloak on and get up to walk away, you grab all the virgins. And that's exactly what they did. He jumped up, put his cloak on, they grabbed all the virgins, throw the Sabians out of the village. And we don't have to be geniuses to figure out, or historians to figure out, did you think this went over really well? No. The Sabians were not happy, right? They were not a happy group of guys. So it took some time for them to organize. In the meantime, the Romans tell the Sabian women, we're not going to rape you, but you must pick husbands from among us, blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, they marry into the Romans, and there were several battles with the Sabians. And the end of the story is that at one point there was going to be a major battle, and the Sabian women got between what was their fathers and brothers and now their husbands and sons and said, listen, we can't do this. We're going to kill each other off. We need to have peace among us. And the Sabians gave up on the fight for the women, and they commingled with Roman society. And they came to live with the Romans, and they came to work with the Romans. Anybody here think that went really well for the first decade or so? No. If you read that part of Roman history, there was a lot of stabbing in the dead of night. You know, you did not want to walk around in that town. Around the same time, around the 1st century BC, the king of Rome, the second king of Rome, decided to make collegiums. One of the reasons he made them was that Roman society was absolutely horrified by the idea of death, and a poor death. So if you're a wealthy man and you could have a mausoleum of some sort, you were all set. But if you were a poorer person, you had to struggle to find a way to be buried correctly. Because without this, you were going to be some lost soul battered by the winds for all eternity. So the initial idea behind it was they were funerary organizations. And the Romans put up with quite a bit that they wouldn't put up from other organizations with these guys, because they understood this need. They understood the societal need to have correct burial. As they put these things together, they branched into other areas, and they became all sorts of other things. There he is. Newman was the second king. I couldn't remember his name a second ago. And he's the one who first gave a license to the Roman Collegium. Now, the Romans at that time were very much like the Germans of World War II in the sense they loved their records. They wanted records of everything. Everything was going to be numbered. Everything was going to be accounted for, and you were not opening something up without the Senate's approval or the Emperor's approval. Not happening. So if you're going to do a collegium, they're going to give you a license to do that. Sounds pretty much like what happens when you open up a lodge today. You must get some kind of piece of paper from the Grand Lodge saying you can do that, yes? Otherwise, you are not permitted to do so. The other thing they did with it was they gave them a lot of leniency as far as making their own laws for their own little societies. So as these things grew, he's out of place. As these things grew, they went into other areas of the world. They marched with the Roman Legion. Everybody knows the Roman Legion conquered the world, which is true. But to a very large extent, conquering the world is one thing, keeping it's quite another. What kept the world, to a large extent, was the Roman Collegium. The armies would march to whatever point, they would take over whatever they took over, and the Collegium would stay behind and build the roads, and build the towns, and build the amphitheaters, and the baths, and the libraries, and the schools, and everything that made a society, they built it. And the people in those societies weren't stupid. They looked around. They might not have liked the Romans too much, but they went, wait a second, if these guys are working in this area, and they're doing this, and these are the carpenters, and these are the stonemasons, they go there to learn how to do that, and they build these things, and they have a good life. Maybe I should do that if I become a Roman citizen. It was a way to inculcate the values of the the Roman society onto the conquered territories as much as they could. So the interesting thing was how they were organized. Back in the early days of Rome, they actually sat down. You had to get permission from the emperor or the Senate. Collegium must consist of 3 or more. Any Masons in the room? Does that sound familiar? Just asking, okay? They were authorized to set up their own regulations. They had to get that license. Remember I talked about that? What does a lodge get? They get a charter. You had to have your charter to open up a collegium. And like I said, the Romans loved their records. If they came on your gathering and it was a collegium type thing, you didn't have your piece of paper from the state, they called you a very bad thing. They called you irregular or clandestine. Does that sound familiar to anybody in the room? Yeah, this is all coincidence, I'm sure. Once you were considered, you had to be voted on for admission. That's also something Masons have to do, yes? Okay, and when they were admitted into a collegium, now each one had their own particular way of doing it, they had their own little take on it, but the point is, there was a ceremony to get into each and every one of these. It wasn't, we just voted Joe in, he's good, let's go. Once you were voted on, there was a process of initiation. What happens when we bring the Mason in for the very first time? He is what? He's initiated, yes? So this comes from way back. When you were actually initiated, then you were, here's the words you got to look at, free to partake in vocational esoteric training. So you were free and admitted. Now, admitted comes later. I'm not going to try the Italian and the Latin word, but they translate to free and admitted. And in their case, you were free to partake in both the vocational and esoteric training. What do I mean by esoteric training? Each one of these societies, whether it was the winemakers or it was the stonemasons or the carpenters or the tanners, not only do they have this educational thing for their profession going on, they also had a deity assigned to them by the emperor. And that esoteric training was also available. I'm just guessing that the winemakers, it was probably Dionysus, yes? Because he was the god of wine. They had monthly or annual fees. That's not so unusual. You have to have that to go on, but guess who else has that, right? They made part of their being was to make new members and bury the dead. Does that sound familiar to any Blue Lodge brothers? Joe, okay. I thought you left me there for a minute. They do not recognize uncharted collegium. They were irregular. Sounds kind of familiar. It sounds kind of like what we do today, yes? From the very first, the architects seemed to have a special place in the society. And they were given privileges that were not given to the other collegium. They had a secretary, treasurer, keeper of the archives, priest, and chaplain. We're going to look at more later that will give you an idea. The members were of 3 orders, not unlike today's fellows and masters. This is not Masonic. This was taking off a marker in the city of Rome. I lost the note on it. I wanted to put the note with it, where it was from and who took the photo. I lost that. But what you need to know about this is they did an annual ceremony where at the beginning of their year, they had a ceremony to remember the dead who had passed. And at the end of the year, they would have a closing ceremony to remember the dead who had passed and close it out for the year. Does that sound familiar to any Masons here? So I'm sure this is all coincidental. They all had their own stones and markers, but these guys had this. That looks like it could be in any lodge in the country, yes? And this is 100 years BC, 200 years BC, I'm sorry, AD in Rome. So they were given these special privileges. They had markers for the different organizations set up throughout the city of Rome, and they would do their ceremonies there to remember their dead. One of the ones here is the College of Diana. We're not going to go too deep into it, but I like this. The monthly fee was required for 100 sesterces for wine. and a monthly fee of $1.25. I have no idea how much that is. But does this sound a little bit like a lodge you might be in? It's almost precise. Here's some of the different ones we had. We had the Shoemakers, the College of Devils. That's an interesting one. I'm not going to go too much into it, but several hundred years later, quite a number of hundred years later, Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Hellfire Club. And the Hellfire Club founded their club based on the ideas of the College of Devils. I mean, they had their own take on it, but Byron. Yeah, I was waiting for somebody to catch that one. I had something else to say. I didn't realize we were going to have mixed company, so I'm going to leave it alone. But yeah. The College of Wine Dealers and the College of Planters. Initially, here's something interesting. Initially, you go back to that initial setup in the 2nd century BC, there were 3 times 3 was the number of collegium. And I can't recite them all to you, but that's interesting. They had architects, they had carpenters, and they had tanners. Then they had the next group of 3, and they had the next group of 3. And the reason that the emperor gave for giving 3 sets of 3 is that 3 was a sacred number, and 3 was also a treble voice. So they had the concept of 3 being a sacred number tied into the collegium from its very founding with the Romans, at least. There's some more. I'm not going to, College of Gladiators. Here, this is probably Bacchus, right? Some of you guys are all into that. That's the Bacchus workers, makers of chairs for the gods. I tried finding what that was. I can't even imagine what that is. The College of Actors, the College of Junkmen. So we had all kinds of colleges later on in Rome. Oh, there we go. So now, yes. Oh, I thought somebody was talking to me. So we've got the idea that the Collegium kind of looks like the setup of a Masonic Lodge, yes? Yes, okay. All right, there's movement, thank God. I thought they gassed the room on me. Okay. So how did it get from Rome to 1717, if that's indeed what happened? And there's several theories how that happened. I'm not going to go into all of them. My point tonight, talking to you guys, is to give you an idea of how some of these things might have happened. I'll tell you my favorite one of the 3. Why? Because it's my favorite one, that's why. Okay, it makes just as much sense, if not more, than some of the other ones that are up there. So I like that one the best. But understand, this has been a theory of conjecture for quite a while. And we have the first theory, the Dionysian Artifices theory. And basically it says that the men who built King Solomon's temple hung on to the information, and they were able to pass it on, and it came down eventually to the Roman Legion. That's really what it's saying, which is a nice theory. It's very nice, but it tells me nothing about what happened to it after the Roman Empire fell. There's a big gap there. What happened after the Roman Empire fell? It doesn't tell me. It just stops with the Roman Empire. So I don't particularly care for that one, but it's good a theory as any. There's a Comanchean theory. The Roman builders took refuge near Lake Como, and they hid there until the time was right to come back and teach the building arts. Okay, you know, I can't say it's incorrect. I have no proof that it's incorrect. I find it difficult to believe that the barbarians are doing their barbarian thing for how long, and they missed Lake Como. I could be wrong, but there's a theory there. And maybe they're able to keep it secret and clandestine. I don't know. This is the one I happen to like. I like this one. I'm not telling you it's the right one. I'm telling you it's the one I like, okay? According to theory, the Collegium entered with Britain with the Roman army, and they built everything there, basically. They built everything that was worth anything in England at that time. England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. If it was made out of stone, they probably built it. And a lot of it's still standing today. Well, what happens? Rome falls. The legions withdraw. They go back to where they came from. There's no more connection between the Collegium and Rome. I'm sure every builder didn't run away the day the Roman legions left. And I'm sure they didn't stop building everything the day the Roman legions left. People continued to do trade and do business, and was probably much changed. It probably went through a very difficult time. But the idea of them continuing the building trades there makes sense. When you go to the Middle Ages, and there was a book written years ago, it was talked about how Ireland saved the world. It was really based on when the empire fell, that the libraries of Europe, what was left of them, what they could consolidate, ended up in Ireland and Scotland and Wales with the monks and the monasteries, and they kept these writings and these books alive. I think maybe something similar probably happened with this. The only thing I find in way of proof of me thinking this is right, and I'm not saying it's the only thing that could be right, this all could be partially right. This repeats the same thing, but down in the bottom here, I highlighted this in red. The Romans are gone, Catholicism took over, it killed off all the pagan gods, so now at the time, Masonry had a more Christian bent to it, if it was around at all at that time. And the Bishop of Wilfrid of York joined with the Abbot of Wearmouth in sending to France and Italy to induce Masons to return and build in stone, as he put it, after the Roman manner. So when I researched this further, there were Masons in Rome, there were Masons in England and Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and they were sent to these various parts of Europe in order to rebuild. Kind of makes sense to me, only because of the isolation of England and Ireland at the time. The barbarians were running up and down through Europe. That was easy. You had to take a boat to go beat up on the Irish and the English. So they got off a little easy compared to everybody else in Europe. Yes? Maybe? You guys need more wine? What do we need? Okay. All right, the Collegium. Here's where I say again, it's coincidence. And I'm not telling you I'm right. I'm telling you this is what I found. It makes sense to me. The Collegium was modeled after the family. So when you entered any one of those collegium as a carpenter, whatever you were, they considered you family. You could be brother, you could be sister, you could be father, you could be uncle. What's Masonry modeled after? Somebody. Brother. Thank you. To be a collegium, you had to be duly constituted by law. Here you have to be duly constituted by a Grand Lodge. Collegium that were not were collegium, or the collegium that were collegium licita, and the ones were illicita. The illicit lodges were clandestine lodges. The meetings were secret. Now, nobody in the room is going to give up our deep, dark secrets, but we don't advertise what we do in a meeting. There's no real secret there. The point of the secrecy of Masonry is that I have to be able to trust you, that if you can give me your word that you won't say what happened here, which is a little thing, you could probably find it online, but if I can trust your word on that, I can probably trust your word on something else. Dues and fees, we have that. They had a big part of their collegium came from, remember I told you they were terrified of death and not being able to be buried correctly? A big part of what they had going on was a common fund for charitable relief. And most of that was toward funerary rites. Hey, brother, I just saw you come in. Good. You had to be voted on for a mission. Well, we have to be voted on for a mission. There were corporatists. We were free and accepted. The symbolic use of working tools. We have the symbolic use of working tools. Does anybody see something that might look similar in any of this? I don't think it's accidental. The men who formed Masonry prior to 1717, when they were sitting down figuring out how to do this, were men who read the ancient scripts. They knew about Rome in great detail. They knew about the ancient gods. They knew about the Greek gods. They knew exactly what they were writing when they put it in. The symbolic use of tools is what we use in Masonry. And as I showed you before, the square and the circle, yes? The square tells you have a good physical life. The four corners of the world should be good. The four elements should be good. Everything else about your physical world will be good if you do things correctly. Your spiritual world, we discussed, if you have that perfect circle, it's a symbol of a perfect spiritual life. Well, let's take a look at the offices. They had a magister. We have a worshipful master. They had decurions. We have wardens. Interestingly, in everything I read, that word decurions actually means warden. Do we have anybody speak Italian in the room? Latin? Nobody? No? Then I can say anything I want, can't I? No, I actually read that. No. They had a scriba, we have a secretary. We have a treasurer, they had one. They have an archivist, we have an historian. They have a chaplain. The elders and seniors were their men who had gone through all their rites and had learned all the things they could about their craft. We have master masons. They had journeymen, we have fellow craft. We have apprentices. We have entered apprentices. Religious in character, bestowed in the character of the god of the early Collegium was bestowed on you by the Emperor Numa, or he was actually a king. Emperor didn't come till later. King Numa. The death of paganism was responsible for the introduction of saints, as I discussed earlier. So if you look at this, the stated goal was to have a perfect world and a perfect spiritual life. That told you how to get it. Now, this is a very old idea that's been going on forever and ever. I'm going to go backwards here. I put one of these out of order. Bad me. Where is he? I'm looking for the Vitruvian Man. Did I pass the Vitruvian Man? I did. Okay. Catherine actually knows what I'm looking for. Thank God somebody knows what I'm talking about. There we go. If you need more proof that we are somewhat related to the Roman Collegium, if you want to be cautious about it, Marcus Vitruvius Polo. He was a Roman. He was a military man. He was the officer of ballista. He was an architect. He was an engineer. Toward the end of his life, he wrote a series of 10 books. They were called On Architecture. And we get a lot of masonry from what he did and said. But one of the things he wrote about the proportions of a man. And it basically dealt with the length of his head from his forehead to his chin and the width of his arms. And he wrote this out probably around the time Christ died. Hundreds of years later, Da Vinci looked at those notes and he gave us the Vitruvian Man. He made an image of what Vitruvius told us. And from his own notes, he's telling us that the center of the world, the center of the man, is the center of the circle, is the navel. Also, the center of the spiritual world is the man's navel. He made this mathematically and physically correct so we could visualize what was told to us so many centuries before. Now, I brought this man up, Vitruvius. He did a lot of writing, but the 10 books give us a lot that we have directly in what we say in lodge, and it gives us a lot of how our lodges are set up. And I'll give you just a couple of quick examples. He writes in, I think it's book number 4, about how a temple should be set up. Well, the temple should be set up due east to west. The highest point should be in the east, the altar should be in the center, and the worshipers should look from the west. Sound a little bit familiar? Okay. He also says that the most powerful god, because he's dealing with gods, not God, he's dealing with gods, plural. The highest gods should be up at a higher level than the other gods. So in his temples, they were up 3 steps in the east. That sound familiar to anybody? Okay, and the next most powerful gods would be on the other side of the temple. And they were up 2 steps. And then the demigods, or whatever the lower gods would be in the other part of the temple, and they'd be up 1 step. Coincidence? No, I don't think so. He also wrote a specific piece of description about a Corinthian capital. And he says it was formed by the most remarkable circumstance. That a man passed by the tomb of a young woman and spied a basket of toys placed atop an acanthus root. And as the branches grew up in the acanthus root, they met with an obstruction and bent downwards. And that was the formation in his mind of the idea of the capital of that pillar. If you've sat through any of our degrees, you might have heard something similar. Does it sound familiar to anybody? Yep, yeah, because if you read actually what he said in the book, it's almost verbatim what you'll see in some of the stuff we might read. So none of this is accidental. The men who formed Masonry were, as I said, all men of letters, and they didn't know the term at the time, but it's clear to me what they did for a lot of our ritual work was they did an ancient job of cut and paste. They took from different authors and different people, put in the best parts to express the ideas they were trying to convey. So we get things from the 1st century, and we get things from 900 years later, and we get things from 2,000 years earlier, and they're all kind of squeezed together. So if you're a Mason, and sometimes you say, well, this stuff, sometimes it doesn't flow well, it's not just the Old English that's used, it was literally cut and pasted together. And that's a lecture for another time. We're not going to go deeply into that. But the message of the old mystery schools was this: if you do this, you have a perfect world. Now, this is my opinion. Don't jump up and down. I'm just trying to point something out. Up until this time, all knowledge of this type was secret. So that they'll tell you what you could get, but what do you have to do to get it? You had to be part of the mystery school. You had to be part of the program, and you weren't going to get this information for quite some time. The Masons over here tell us how to achieve this. Because how do you make a circle? You make it with a compass. How do you make a square? With a square. So the message, although the same, in my mind, changes slightly. It tells us what the goal is to how to achieve the goal. How to achieve the goal is given to us in our ritual. It's given to us in our lectures. If you listen to them, you'll understand what they're talking about, even though the language might be a little funny. What does it say? It might seem strange and perhaps even meaningless, but there is meaning in all this. So you've got that part of the lecture. We went from very long ago in before Egypt, and we went all the way through 1717 up until today. I see a direct connection to the Roman Collegium. The fact that, or the theory that we're related to the mystery schools, we have the same system of initiation. We have the same system of degrees. Our message is unique to us. The Masonic story is unique to the Masons, but the idea of transmission and how it's done is very ancient. Does this make sense? Okay, so I didn't drink too much wine that night when I wrote this. Okay, we're in good shape. So you got the wisdom. It came from the mystery schools. We got the strength. It came from the formation of things like the Collegium, which were brought forward to today. How did it get here? I'm not sure. I gave you my theory. It sounds pretty good. If you have a better one, please tell me. I'm always open to listening. I could be wrong. I often am. My wife is here. She'll tell you I'm wrong a lot. Okay? Stop it, Eddie. In any event, the beauty part of this is, what is the result of this esoteric training? Because I read to you earlier what our priest Origen had to say back in the 1st century, right? And he told us how the Egyptians acted towards the mysteries. But the most interesting thing I say for last, he also said, after he talked about they keep it in fables and allegories. Well, that's very Masonic, fables and allegories. But he also writes, awakening of intellect, power, and money will not activate moral virtue. You got that? You can, the activation of intellect, psychic power, or money will not activate moral virtue. And that is the point of Masonry. The point of Masonry is to activate moral virtue. And it's given to us in a unique system, given to us through allegory. You know, we have all kinds of stories in our life that we hear, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but one of my heroes in life was a man named Campbell, and he wrote many books on mythology. And Joseph Campbell basically said, if you, as a group, a state, a religion, well, he didn't use corporation, but I'll use it. If you control the narrative for long enough, you'll control the direction of people's minds and spirits. And that's absolutely true. I find it to be so in my life. So the end result for us as Masons is that we don't try to find guys who are, I'm going to use the term, but it's not really. We're not going to look for evil men and try to make good guys out of them. We try to find men who are trying to be good men to start with and make them better than they were. And how do we do that? We do that by intercourse with each other. I'm in the diamond business. Guess what? The only thing you can do with a diamond to polish it is put another diamond on it. The only way you can make another man better is having a better man work with him. And where do I find these men? I find them in the halls of Masonry. And I was very lucky all those years ago to meet the Masons that I met. You know, that gentleman I spoke about that was the doctor, he was a 33rd degree Mason. And I spent God knows how many hours, weeks, months, years poring over everything related to Masonry and everything related to symbology. The symbols that we have, the symbols that we hold in our heart are the most important things to us because they will activate in your mind a response. Now, I wear Masonic rings, some people don't, but when I have the ring on, subconsciously, I feel it, I know it. When things come up, I can feel it, and I sometimes look at that ring and I think, I don't want to act this way wearing this ring. I actually think that sometimes. That's a good thing. That keeps me in check. It keeps me within due bounds of my passions. It keeps me from acting maybe the way I shouldn't. Now, some might argue I should be a much better person and not need to wear that ring. You should have seen this mess before. That's what I have to tell you. Thank God for the ring. I should wear a bigger one. But the most important thing to take away from this is charity. That's what Masonry, to a large extent, produces. It produces charity. And I've got a couple of things here to show you. Maybe you know some of them, maybe you don't. I've got to find my little clicker thing here. In New Jersey, I'm going to talk about New Jersey, New York, and a couple other things, and we're going to be done quick, and then you can all thank me and applaud later. Fair enough? Okay. In New Jersey, the Grand Master this year has two charities that he's looking at. And we have, in New Jersey, we have 50 learning centers for dyslexic children. And I'm lucky enough in my lodge, we have one right down the block. My lodge donated the building. We renovated it years ago. We pay for the teachers' salaries. Anything that the kids need is paid for by us. We pay for the insurance. We pay for the books. And there's 50 of these around the state of New Jersey that are all run by Masons. And in this crazy world, you hear all kinds of nonsense things. How often do you hear something like that? Not often. There's a lot of it going on, but do we always hear about it? No. And that's part of why I'm talking about this tonight. So 50 schools that do this, and I'm very proud of this thing. It used to be the old library in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey. It looks like a one-room schoolhouse. But guess what? It serves the purpose, and quite a number of children have gone through there and had their lives changed by this. The other thing he's looking at this year is the Shriners Children's Hospital. Anybody not hear of them? Everybody's heard of them. Well, there's some non-Masons in the room. They might not know. Anyway, there's 22 nonprofit medical facilities across North America, and children with orthopedic conditions, burns, spinal cord injuries, cleft palate, they're eligible for care free of charge, which I think is a nice thing. I know right in this building there's a group of Shriners who are also Masons that part of what they do is they pick the children up at the airports here in New York and drive them to the hospital in Philadelphia on their own time. I think that's a nice thing. We all have busy lives, right? And take a day out to take a trip to Philly and back on the same day. That's a little giving of yourself. I think that's a nice deal. Their mission is to provide highest quality care to children with neurological and neuroskeletal conditions, burns and injuries. The vision, become the best at transforming children's lives, which they've done. So you've got the idea that I'm going to just read you a couple of real quick things, then I'm going to end it because I'm tired. It's past my bedtime. I'm out in New York. I'm supposed to be in Jersey. Masonic charity has a long history. And back in 1717, when the lodges were first brought together, they were mostly consisting of operative Masons, men who actually used hammer and stone. And they brought the speculative Masons in. But gradually they became mutual benefit societies concerned largely with the charity relief for the destitute and the unemployed. The old charges going back to the 1390, according to Dr. Anderson anyway. I like this. The old charges, this is old stuff now. They called on stonemasons to assist a strange mason with up to 2 weeks' work and lodging. In speculative terms, they directed masons to aid the needy and act with charity towards all. Strange masons. I would have made a lot of money back then. Okay? I'm not going to go too deep into this one, but in a period of time in our country, poverty was looked at as a retribution from God for your misdeeds. And if you were on the dole, so to speak, the society that gave you whatever they're going to give you would make it public knowledge, you know. Joe got this, Joe got that. We're paying for Joe's rent. And it was meant as a form of punishment and embarrassment for being destitute. And I particularly like this story. The Masons didn't particularly care for that. And this is 1783, thereabouts, 1785. I can't get an exact date. Federal Lodge in Watertown, Connecticut, purchased a cow for the use of a widow and her children. And the cow was carried on the books of the lodge for several years as a lodge asset to spare the family the embarrassment of accepting charity from the state. That's nice. And in a society that thought so much about, we're going to put you down for this, there were Masons carrying this woman and the family secretly. Not often what goes on. In today's society, just like years ago, if somebody gave away whatever amount of dollars, it was all over the news and they couldn't stop talking about themselves, yes? These guys hid the fact for years. Okay? After the Chicago fire, they actually raised so much money, the Grand Lodge of Chicago actually had to tell the rest of the nation, please stop sending money. Please stop sending food. There's nobody to give it to. Everybody's got everything they need as a result of what you sent. That's amazing. The influenza flu hit in the teens, the 19s, around World War I time, and the Masonic homes took in people with influenza, and they had a very high survival rate. After 9/11, we did charity work, and I'm not going to go into it, but the last several hurricanes, we did charity work. The last big one we had, I forget which one it was. There was a huge storm about 4 years ago, and I know several brothers that we packed up huge 18-wheel trucks, and they drove it down to Texas. And they took care of the brothers down there and non-Masons as well. So in a world that's a little bit nuts sometimes, if you get a little bit tired of watching CNN, read about Masonic charity. Because Masonic charity, to me, is a bright spot in this world. It's altruistic. It's done for no other reason than to help the next person. You don't see a lot of that these days. You know, we Are the World, and you know, they sell the albums, and the guys who make the albums keep 3/4 of the money. That's not the case with this. We have a nice system here where the people who need something, if we can help them as their needs may seem to require, or as our ability to give will permit. But it's altruistic, which is nice. Here in New York, I know the Grand Master is doing something called the Greenhouse Initiative. The Greenhouse Initiative, yes, I got it right, thank God. And basically, he's got a greenhouse set up near one of the nursing homes upstate that's Masonically run, and they have the young children come in, and they interact with the old folks, and they grow the vegetables together, and it's good for the earth, but more importantly, it's good for the old folks, and it's good for the little kids as they get together and do these things. It's a way of bringing people together in a world that is as divided as ever was. I'm not going to say it's increasingly divided. It's always been divided. But if you've come into this thing tonight trying to find something about Masonry, the Masons already know what I'm talking about to a large extent. But if you're here and you don't know, and maybe I want to do this, maybe I don't, this is a society of men that will accept you as you are. And if whatever religion you are is okay with us, the only thing you're ever asked is, do you believe in a creator God? If the answer is yes, we're good to go. You know, you have to be a good person. I mean, you can't be a bank robber, but I believe in God. You know, it just have to be clear. But you know what? About 15 years ago, I was very lucky. I met the Dalai Lama, and I was probably as close as this man is to him. And he went on for hours, but at one point, somebody asked him a question about religion, and he looked up, he says, I won't talk about religion. He said, but if you're a good person, be a good person. And if you're a good Christian, be the best Christian you can be. And if you're a Muslim, be the best Muslim you can be. And if you're a Jew, be the best Jew you can be. And that's what I feel about Masonry. You can come in here and you can be what you are, be the best that you are, and have other men help you be better than you are. I hope I didn't bore you too much. I hope there's wine left to dull the pain I gave you. And I am done, Catherine.